So now I go back to my, whoops, this last row that I wove with this scrap yarn was a blue layer plain weave 1 row, and you can tell because the weft thread will still keep moving around. So what I needed to do was to press the treadles for plain weave 2, treadles 4 and 4 and 8. And again, just at this very beginning, hopefully, I'm going to have to do some strumming. But I might have to do it all the way through, and that's just because Rep has so many ends packed in together that they keep wanting to find friends. And they do that by staying in the, or getting out of place in the shed. Another reason, remember when I threaded my reed, I had 4 ends in each of these dents, and that's kind of packed. So I'm not surprised that I'm having to do some strumming between each group. And normally, most weavers would tell you, okay, weave your header by weaving 3 picks and then beat, but I've already done that once, and I'm now going to start to beat. And I am beating right now on what's called an open shed, where I've still got the shafts up. Then I'm going to put the shafts down and beat it again. Now I'm going to go back to, and this is my, it's going to be hard for me to remember until I've done it for a while, to press 1 treadle and then the 2nd treadle. Comb everybody out. And I'm back to plain weave or tabby 1. Push everybody down. And go through. Okay, I'm getting so close to the beater now that I'm going to advance my warp. And to do that, I'm pressing down on the break release pedal. And I am hitting my ratchet advance lever to just move the warp yarn forward. And then when I've reached the point where I want to stop, I just continue to crank on the ratchet advance lever while the brake pedal is not held down, and that just tightens everybody up. So let's see how this goes. See, and the last pick I wove was tabby 1, plain weave 1. So now I want to do plain weave 2. Another way that's really easy for keeping track of which, pick you're on is if you start plain weave 1 on the left side, you know that when the yarn is coming out of the left side, you need to do plain weave 2. And I want to show you something else. I accidentally hit treadle 7 instead of treadle 8, and some of these blue threads from the bottom layer came to the top. And that's another sign that I did something wrong on my tabby weaving, my plain weave. Okay, so now that I've got my correct treadle going, it's working a little better. You're only seeing my accent colors. And you can also see, if you look closely, that when there are gaps between these different bundles of ends, they are closing up. They have closed up. And if they haven't closed up, it's because there's a thread out of place. So everybody's looking good. Raise 1 and then raise 5, and I don't have to push, or at least I don't have to push the shafts down as far every time. And again, strum, strum, strum. One of the trickiest parts to me for weaving is finding that perfect amount of tension. I'm checking to look for out of place threads. The perfect amount of tension so that my shed pops into place without my having to do all this fiddling. And I'm probably always going to have to do this fiddling with this pattern. So that the shed pops into place without having to do much work. is if you don't have enough tension, your shed just kind of goes, ugh, and doesn't go up very high. Whereas if you have too much tension, sometimes you have to push shafts down by hand. And neither of these options to me are ideal. So if I find that sweet spot, I am going to be very, 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 very happy. And I'm going to guess that because this is rep weave and I've got 4 threads in each dent, that I'm just going to have to strum every single time. Unless I try, we'll see in a sec. I'll weave this pick and then I will tighten up the tension and we'll see if that does anything. Okay. Another thing to note is that typically when you're weaving most weave structures, you want to put your weft thread at an angle so that it has space to do the over-under thing across all these ends without pulling in at the selvages. But in rep, you don't do that. And I got so used to going straight across on my first rep project that honestly, the next time I weave a non-rep project, I'm going to have to work hard to remember to make that angle. All right, so beating into place. And let's see what happens if I crank up the tension. This is about as far as I can go. And in fact, when I'm going to slide these ends apron cords off because there's no there aren't any little bundles on the other side of them, and there's a lot of tension in the middle here. So if I kept those 2 apron cords on, my apron bar would start to bow, and that is kind of not good for the apron bar. So let's see what happens when I tightened up the tension. So I've got a really clean shed coming up and a fairly clean shed coming up. But I might decide in a second, oh, and I have to push these shafts down by hand because everybody's coming up for the party and we don't want that. So I suspect I'm going to do better easing up the tension, maybe just 1 notch, and we'll see how that does. Yeah, I'm going to ease up the tension 1 notch. And it's worth showing you how I do that because it's something that weavers often need to do. They kind of overdo it when they advance the warp or just overdo it like I did, just fiddling with the tension. And it's just not great. So here's how I'm going to ease up on the tension. And it's going to be hard to see because my hands are going to be in the way. I'm going to step on my brake release pedal. I'm going to turn the beam away from me so that I can flip up the ratchet advance lever and the ratchet dog, and then I'll let it go. And then I'll tighten her up again, but not go so far. Let's try stopping here and see how that goes. And now my weft is over on the right side, so I know my next shed needs to be a tabby 1 shed. And so this time, all the shafts did not come up for the party, which is good. And it seems pretty obvious to me that I am just, in fact, going to have to suck it up and plan to use my sword on every single pick. But that's okay because I would do that anyway. And I'm seeing a couple of loose threads, and I'm just pulling on them, the individual thread to tighten up. I can try, but there's probably not much point undoing this whole knot. But once these loose threads are past the spot where I'm weaving anyway, it kind of doesn't matter. They're going to do what they're going to do. Okay. Pack everybody into place. I'm going to try one more flick of tension. and tabby 2. I feel that it's worth going ahead and weaving an extra long header. Because it gives you a feel for problems you might discover without using up your precious yarn, your project yarn. This is just left over from my last rep weave project. And so I wasn't going to use it for anything. In fact, it's a good way to empty out the bobbin so I can free it up for other projects. So now I can see that when I beat, my weft thread is going in a fairly straight line, which is what we want. And I can fine tune this even more if I feel the need. And it's the selvages, in my experience, that tend to come loose most often. And the knots have gotten underneath the apron bar. Okay, and this one looks a little bit loose because the beater will only go as far down as the highest point on the previous pick. So if I've got hills and valleys in my line of weft, in my pick line, or this is called the fell line, which is where the woven fabric meets the unwoven warp threads. If my fell line is waving or angling this way or anything like that, my beater will stop at the highest point of the fell line. So it is worthwhile fiddling a little bit to get it as straight as possible. Okay, so this is looking really good to me. I'm now going to set up my stick shuttle with my fat weft and a boat shuttle bobbin with my real weft, my thin weft, my skinny weft color, so that I can do maybe just an inch or two of sampling just to make sure that my thin weft isn't too thin compared to my fat weft. And I'll be able to tell by how much these ridges are packing, how fat they get. And then I'll be able to start weaving. At long last, I will be able to start weaving.